So this week was a reading by Eisenstein, and it was called A Dialectic Approach to Film Form. And straight away his name sounded like Einstein, so I thought this is going to be a difficult read, and it was. So after some research, I've kind of come to realise that Eisenstein was one of the greatest filmmakers and sought after film theorists. And his writing in film form is about the art of cinema. He talks a lot about montages, which I'm going to go into in a bit. But kind of what I got for the reading was he takes a very scientific approach about filmmaking, which I kind of struggle with because I feel like art forms and filmmaking is about creativity, not like the hard set in stone rules of science. But even so, I gave it a go. So these are some of the points that I felt he made in his writing and what I thought about them. So there's this basic unit of film that Eisenstein talks about, and this is the meeting, or what he calls the conflict, of two still images. So Eisenstein thinks of film as more of an ideogram. So film shows something without having to physically say anything. So it's kind of like these images, the symbols, which ties in quite nicely with vines and how we looked at vines last week, in that the images can actually project something to the viewer without physically having to say anything at all. And so each image exists to then be replaced by another image. And this is what Eisenstein calls the dialectical approach, which is actually an approach that Marx spoke about. Eisenstein refers to Marxist ideas a lot, and it's this process where there is a conflict, and two forces are in conflict. When they kind of collide, they create something new, and this new third component is better than either of the single other two components. So that's the dialectical approach that Eisenstein talks about, and he also calls it the conflict-based approach, and he often talks about conflicts and collisions throughout his work. In the example I've just shown you, the static image is one component and the camera is the second component, and these go into conflict with each other to create the third component, which is what Eisenstein calls the dynamic. So it's the image that the viewer sees and can make sense of and creates a new representation and idea that has been created by the static image and by the camera. So we're moving on to the important point of montage now. And so a montage is basically a method of film editing, and Eisenstein was like a pioneer in this method. So again, it's this idea of two or more images added together to create a third component that is better than any of the single components. So this kind of enables manipulation of the audience's perception, and he calls this process to happen through a collision of shots, as the montage rises complexity. So it's like layers upon layers upon layers of meaning that are being created by these shots put together. The montage then requires the audience to interpret the sequence of pictures, because these pictures are basically showing you something rather than telling you something, so the audience can interpret it in any way they want to, so you end up with lots of different perspectives. And in today's society, a montage is often used more for showing like a linear sequence of events, not just using images to express abstract ideas. But I guess that's why we're doing this reading this week, because we've got to make music video mashups. So we're selecting clips and musics and colliding them together to kind of create this mashup, this montage. So yeah, it's a cool film editing technique. I've also picked a couple of good quotes that I like this week, and the first one is, "The desire for perfection ruins art. Irregularity is the basis of all art forms." And I quite like this because I felt it tied in with the glitch art week that we did, that the broken is beautiful and that the strive for perfection doesn't even exist, so don't even try. The more irregular the better, the more abstract the better. So I really like this idea that nothing has to be perfect. Perfect doesn't exist. So my final quote is, Art is always in conflict according to its nature, because its nature is a conflict between natural existence and creative tendency. So I kind of had an issue with this because it's saying that nature and creativity are in conflict, but surely it's natural to be creative, because if we didn't have this natural instinct to be creative, then we wouldn't have artists and people who write books and people who perform in shows and stuff. These are all art forms. So I kind of disagreed with that a bit, and I thought I would actually critique Eisenstein, because I think that to be creative is a natural instinct.